If you've walked through a grocery store lately and felt like your bill went up while your bags felt lighter, you're not crazy. And it's actually worse than you think. A few weeks ago, a lawsuit hit a federal court and confirmed something millions of Americans have suspected at checkout but could never prove. A major cereal brand promised 15 servings on the box. But when an independent lab actually put the contents on a scale, they found barely 11. This wasn't a printing error. It wasn't one box, one factory, one bad day. And today, I'm going to show you why this happens, how many companies are doing the exact same thing, and how much money is quietly leaving your wallet with documents, not guesses. Let me say this up front, because I'm going to hold to it for the rest of this video. Everything I say here is backed by a court record, an official government report, or a peer-reviewed academic study. I won't say I think, or probably anywhere. I'll always be clear about where the evidence ends and speculation begins, because overstating this kind of thing only makes the real problem less believable. Before we go further, one thing: if this video genuinely opens your eyes, do 3 things. Hit like, leave something in the comments below, doesn't need to be long. My eyes are open is enough. And if you don't want to miss investigations like this, subscribe. It takes 10 seconds, but it's what decides how many people this video actually reaches. Now, back to that lawsuit. Part 1. The number that didn't add up. July 2026, New York. A consumer files a complaint. The subject posts Fruity Pebbles cereal, sold in a 19 5-ounce box, labeled family size. The promise on the box is clear: this box should give you 15 bowls, using a standard cup measure. That's a perfectly reasonable number for a family, the kind of number nobody questions when they grab it off the shelf. But the lawyers who brought the complaint hired an independent testing lab. The lab weighed the contents, measured the density, and calculated how many servings that actually works out to using a standard cup. The result: the box delivered not 15 servings, but 11.3. That gap isn't small, nearly a quarter of a serving missing. And that shortfall directly affects the nutrition claims too, because calories and sugar are calculated per serving. If the real serving count is lower than claimed, the calories and sugar per serving printed on the label are off as well. Think about it this way. A family of 4, making their weekly grocery list, counts on this box lasting 5 breakfasts. They trust the 15-serving number because there's nothing else to trust. Nobody weighs the box at home, nobody sends it to a lab. But if the box only delivers 11.3 servings, that family ends up making an unplanned extra store run before the week is out, and they never realize the reason wasn't their own planning, it was the label itself. If this were one box's one mistake, it wouldn't be worth talking about. But this is exactly where the story gets interesting. Let me answer an objection that's probably already forming in your head before you even ask it. That lab was hired by the plaintiff's lawyers. Of course they were going to find a result against the company. That's a fair suspicion, and it's one the courts themselves weigh, which is why labs used in these kinds of cases have to be accredited, meaning their testing methods are verified by an independent standards body. An accredited lab producing a biased result is risky, both scientifically and legally. It risks losing that accreditation. That doesn't automatically make the result definitely true. The case is still in court, and there's no final ruling yet. But the lab was biased, so ignore it doesn't hold up on its own either. And here I need to open a parenthesis, because if you watch this channel, you're different from the average grocery shopper. You stock up for the long term. So this isn't just a "will this last the week" question for you. It's a "will this still be the same amount in 5 years" question. That puts you in a position that's both more exposed and more fortunate when it comes to shrinkflation. More exposed because you're buying in volume. A small per package loss multiplies by 10 when you buy 10 packages. More fortunate because your stockpiling habit already forces you to track price and quantity, which means you can catch shrinkflation far faster than an average shopper as long as you know where to look. Part 2. A coincidence or a pattern? I know the first objection that comes to mind because it occurred to the judges in this case too. Maybe this was just one manufacturing error, a machine misconfigured on one shift. Nobody noticed. That would be a reasonable explanation for one company. But Post isn't alone. Around the same time, a separate lawsuit was filed against General Mills Argueta v. General Mills, brought to federal court in California in December 2025. This time, the claim points to a slightly different mechanism. The outside of the box never changed size, but the package inside was shrunk, leaving more empty air inside the box. In the suit's own words, consumers reasonably assume that the size of a box is proportional to the amount of product inside, meaning people decide, will this last the week, by picking up the box and hearing the rattle, never by weighing what's inside. And there's a third name, this time on the coffee side, much closer to our own territory. Folgers has faced a years-long string of lawsuits over the claim on its packaging about how many cups of coffee you can brew from it, one of which went all the way to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. Same family of claim, a gap between what the label promises and what you actually get. 3 different companies, 3 different product categories, the same underlying complaint. The label says one thing, the contents deliver another. At this point, the question isn't, was this a mistake anymore? It's, how common is this practice? A second objection might come to mind here too. Maybe all these lawsuits are just greedy lawyers chasing differences that don't actually matter. That objection has an answer as well. Courts approach these cases through a principle called the reasonable consumer standard. The question being, would a reasonable consumer notice that this package contains less product than it appears to from the outside? The answer is usually no, because packaging is designed with changes small enough not to be noticed. A box doesn't shrink 30% in one day. It shrinks a few times over several years, a few grams at a time. That's exactly why, in 2025 alone, in California alone, dozens of similar lawsuits were filed across a wide range of products, from plant fertilizer to grass seed, from cosmetics to baked goods. I need to be honest here, because staying credible in this investigation requires it. Companies do have a defense, and it isn't completely baseless. Raw material costs cocoa, wheat, coffee beans have genuinely been volatile and high in recent years, and packaging and shipping costs have risen too. A company shrinking a product to protect its margin is, technically, a different decision from raising the price outright. Mondelez itself, when it reduced the number of triangles in its Toblerone bars in the UK in 2016, the incident, the public nicknamed Brexit Toblerone, attributed it to rising cocoa costs. And the cocoa crisis has been a documented reality since 2024. But here's exactly where the defense starts to crack. If this is really just about covering costs, why do companies almost never announce it openly? If the cost increase is real and legitimate, would saying we shrank our product because raw material costs went up really be less honest than raising the price and explaining why? The answer is no, but the overwhelming majority of companies choose to make the size change quietly, without touching the package design, instead of announcing it. Even if it were a legitimate cost decision, hiding it moves that decision into a different category than a transparent price decision. One more thing before we move on of everything so far. Which one surprised you most? The coffee or the cereal? Leave it in the comments. I want to see what people are actually reacting to. Part 3. The real math. Now let's look at the numbers, because there's a mistake most people make here, and getting it right matters. Say a company shrinks a box from 6 ounces to 13 ounces, while holding the price at $5.99. At first glance, people say 3 ounces lost, so roughly a 19% loss, and present that as the hidden price hike. But that's not the correct calculation. The percentage of product lost, 18.75%, is not the same thing as the increase in the price you're actually paying. Here's how it's actually calculated. Before, you were paying $5.99 divided by 16 equals $0.374 per ounce. Now, for that same $5.99, you get 13 ounces, so you're paying $5.99 divided by 13 equals $0.461 per ounce. The real increase between those two numbers is 23.2% higher than the percentage of product lost, because you're dividing the same amount of money across less product. This distinction matters, because next time someone tells you a product only shrank 10%, you'll know the real price impact is always a bit higher than that. The US Government Accountability Office's official report, published in July 2025, confirms this same point. Shrinkflation's overall contribution to inflation looks small, officially under 0.1 percentage points. But the report itself gives a clear warning. Behind that small-looking headline number, certain categories like coffee and cereal carry a much bigger effect. Look at the average and you'll be misled. The real question is which category you're actually shopping in. One of the GAO's own examples makes this concrete. A pint of ice cream, 16 fluid ounces, is now sold in many stores as 14 fluid ounces at the same price. That's a change that's nearly impossible to catch by eye. The outside of the container usually stays the same size. Only the fill level inside drops. The report notes that these kinds of quiet changes are hard to make more transparent because packaging changes are often on shelves before regulators even catch them. The GAO report also weighed a few policy options for addressing this one being a requirement to disclose on the label when a package shrinks, similar to the laws in France and Italy we'll get to in a moment. But the report's own assessment is cautious. Such a requirement could increase transparency, but it's hard to enforce because thousands of manufacturers, with tens of thousands of products, are constantly making small packaging changes, and there's currently no system to track all of that centrally. Which brings the question to this. Until a regulatory fix arrives, where does real protection come from? Part 4. Just how widespread is this? So far, we've seen 3 lawsuits, 3 companies. But is this isolated, or is it an industry-wide pattern? A study out of the University of Massachusetts Amherst examined packaged food products between 2012 and 2019 and found that package sizes shrank by an average of 14.6%, which means official food. Inflation numbers were understating the real picture by 3.7 percentage points over that period. In other words, even the government's own inflation statistics can't fully capture the real loss, because the packages themselves kept shrinking. A separate study published in October 2025 in the peer-reviewed journal Marketing Science from Informs gives an even more striking number. Roughly 1.92% of grocery products shrink every single year, and that shrinking happens 5 times more often than sizing up, meaning a product's package is 5 times more likely to shrink than to grow. The same study shows sales typically jump about 6% after a product is downsized. Companies aren't doing this by accident. They're doing it because it works. Because most consumers end up buying more units without realizing why. Data compiled by Capital One Shopping fills in the rest of the picture. 33% of grocery products have been affected by this practice, and in the snack category, that number rises to 38%. 75% of Americans say they've personally noticed it, and 48% of those people have switched brands because of it. So this isn't a handful of isolated lawsuits, it's a statistically widespread, measurable pattern. If you want to see a concrete example, you don't even need to dig into court filings, you just need to look at a product still sitting on the shelf right now. In 2021, a 15 5-ounce bag of Doritos sold for $4.79. In 2022, that same bag rose to $5.99, a normal price increase. Nobody's arguing with that. Inflation is real. But in 2023, the price held at $5.99, and the bag got smaller. So the consumer took a hit 2 years in a row, one visible, showing up right there on the receipt, and one hidden, only noticeable if you lined up the old bag next to the new one. Together, they push the real price increase to a level nobody can calculate just by looking at the dollar figure on the shelf tag. Think about it. Our family of 4 buys one of these bags every week for the kids after school. The bag they brought home for the same money 2 years ago is now both more expensive and less full. The family writes it off as inflation, and looking only at the receipt, they're right, but the real loss is bigger than what shows up on that receipt. One more thing worth adding, because it answers the question, why don't I ever notice this? The same research shows companies almost never make this cut in one big step. Instead, once a year, a slice small enough not to be seen a few grams, half an ounce gets trimmed. Repeated over 5 years, the total loss becomes significant. But no single step ever sets off an alarm on its own like the boiling frog metaphor. The change is gradual enough that it happens without being noticed. There's a real perceptual mechanism behind this, and it's not a coincidence. The human eye easily notices a change in a package's height or width, a 2-dimensional change, but is bad at estimating a 3-dimensional change like volume or weight. This is a limitation shown repeatedly in consumer behavior research. When a box's base stays the same and its height drops by a few millimeters, the eye coding that as the same box, despite the real volume loss being much bigger, is a completely normal perceptual error. Saying companies deliberately design around this would be too strong a claim, but the outcome is the same either way. The least noticeable size change gets chosen, not the most honest one. There's an emotional side to this too. One of the studies we mentioned a moment ago shows 82% of consumers are concerned about shrinkflation, up from the year before. But the same study notes that brand switching intent has actually been falling. So people are noticing it, they're bothered by it, but most of them keep buying the same brand anyway, because habit turns out to be a stronger shopping impulse than a feeling of distrust. Companies are counting on exactly that. That psychological reality sits in a strange tension with the legal system's reasonable consumer standard. Courts ask, would a reasonable consumer notice this? But the research we just looked at shows human perception is structurally bad at catching exactly this kind of small, gradual change. So the reasonable consumer standard itself may be setting a bar that's more optimistic than real human behavior. An unresolved tension lawyers and regulators are still arguing over. Everything you've seen so far, the lawsuits, the academic data, the Doritos example, the perception research still sits at the level of corporate carelessness or greed. But now, this story moves out of individual company decisions and into courtrooms and government agendas, and that's where things get more serious. Part 5. The legal and political pushback. This issue hasn't stayed a consumer complaint, it's made its way into courtrooms and legislatures. In Germany, the Hamburg Consumer Advice Center sued Mondelez International, the maker of Milka chocolate, the claim a standard 100-gram chocolate bar had been reduced to 90 grams without any meaningful change to the packaging. The court ruled against Mondelez and found the company had misled consumers. That's not an opinion or an allegation, that's an actual court ruling. France and Italy are among the first countries to regulate this by law. In 2024, France made it mandatory for companies to disclose, for 2 months, when a product's price increases relative to its weight. Italy passed a similar law in 2025. When package size shrinks, it now has to be clearly stated on the label. On the US side, the penalties are real and large. In August 2025, California prosecutors found that multiple grocery products were coming in below the weight stated on the shelf label. That investigation ended in a $5.64 million settlement. And this wasn't an isolated case, because the same retailer had separately agreed, in an earlier class action covering 2018 through 2024, to pay $45 million over claims it overcharged consumers on packaged meat, poultry, seafood, and weighed produce. 2 different years, 2 different cases, the same underlying problem. The weight on the label didn't match what was actually delivered. Also on the US side, a group of senators led by Elizabeth Warren, including Baldwin, Booker, Brown, Casey, Murray, Rosen, Sanders, and White House backed a bill called the Shrinkflation Prevention Act, which would empower the Federal Trade Commission to define shrinkflation as an unfair and deceptive practice and regulate it. That bill hasn't become law yet, but it shows this is no longer just a complaint online, it's on Congress's agenda. I need to add one more thing, because honesty requires it. This bill passing is far from certain, and right now there's no federal regulation in the US directly banning shrinkflation. So today, American consumers don't yet have the kind of mandatory disclosure protection that France and Italy have. Which is exactly why something as simple as checking unit price matters so much if the law isn't protecting you yet. Your own attention is the only protection you have. Part 6. What this actually costs you and what to do about it. So, what does all this actually mean for you? In concrete terms, think of a family of 4, buying cereal, coffee, snacks, a few staples on their weekly grocery run. Nothing luxury, just an ordinary kitchen list. If some of these products are carrying a hidden average price increase of 14% to 23% a year, the real numbers we just walked through that family, while believing their grocery bill has stayed flat, is actually paying hundreds of extra dollars every year. The exact number varies by category, but the direction is always the same, up. The fix for this isn't complicated. but it does require changing a habit at the grocery store. One technique works in almost every store. Don't look at the total price on the package, look at the small unit price printed on the shelf tag, the price per ounce or per pound. That number stays honest, whether the package shrinks or grows, because it doesn't depend on package size at all. And this is exactly where this video connects back to stockpiling. If you regularly stock up on long shelf life staples, rice, beans, canned goods, coffee, paying attention to unit price isn't just smart shopping, it's a direct strategy for protecting your money. Buying while the price is low and the package size is still honest protects you from having to pay the same money for a lot less a year from now. There's one more technique that pairs well with unit price. Jot down the weight of what you buy. With a date, a simple note on your phone is enough. A one-line entry like August 2026, brand X rice, 2 kilograms, $4.99, lets you compare when you buy the same product again a year later. Companies price things assuming you can't make that comparison. You can flip that assumption in your own favor with a habit that takes a few seconds. It also helps to know which categories deserve closer attention. The GAO report and the academic studies agree on this point. Coffee, cereal, snacks, and frozen goods are the categories where shrinkflation shows up most often. Canned vegetables and dry legumes, the kind of staple you'd stockpile, are relatively less affected, likely because packaging standards for those products, like standard can sizes, are less flexible industry-wide. That can shape how you prioritize your own stockpile. You can trust rice and canned goods a bit more, but coffee and packaged snacks are categories worth double-checking every time. To be fair, the whole story isn't dark. As consumer pushback has grown, some companies have voluntarily started adding size-reduced style disclosures to their packaging, not because the law requires it, but purely to protect brand trust. That doesn't mean the problem has gone away, but it is proof that consumer pressure can change something. And part of that pressure is exactly what you're doing right now, noticing this, talking about it, and taking 2 seconds next time you're at the shelf to check the unit price. Picture this. A year from now, same store, same shelves. Most people are still looking at the big number on the package and tossing it in the cart. Nobody's checking the unit price. Nobody's noticing how much lighter that box has actually gotten. The person ahead of you in line mutters, "Everything's gotten so expensive," without understanding why their bill climbed so much compared to last year. They're right, but they don't know it isn't only the prices they can see. You, though, are looking at something different now. The small number on the shelf edge, the weight on the box, and what you paid for the same thing a year ago. That small note on your phone took less than a minute to write, but now it shows you the real price, not the price the marketing department wants you to see. And for everything you stockpile, you now know exactly when you're getting a genuinely full package at a genuinely good price, and over time, that small difference becomes the biggest gap between your grocery bill and the real value of what you're actually stocking away. This knowledge cost you nothing to learn, but most people never will, because nobody ever showed them. You just did, or at least, you can help one more person see it by sharing this video. And one last thought. Nothing in this video is dramatic on its own. A few servings missing from a cereal box, 10 grams off a chocolate bar, half an ounce off a bag of chips. Looked at individually, none of it looks big enough to make headlines. But that's exactly why it can go unnoticed for years, because it never looks like a scandal. Nobody stops to ask questions. The real cost doesn't build up in one big loss, it builds up in thousands of small, unnoticed ones, and the only real defense you have is knowing that. Of everything you saw in this video, which case surprised you most, the cereal, the coffee, or the laws Europe passed against this? Leave it in the comments. It helps me know what to dig into next. Subscribe to Stockpile Man. This is where we talk facts.